Hello, citizens. Preacher Gannon here, and today we're going to talk about Star Citizen. And specifically, we're going to talk about flight models in Star Citizen. So, what you're looking at here is something that I spent about 6 hours putting together yesterday after work. In Godot or Godot, I don't know how to pronounce it. And I previously put this video up online last night on YouTube, but my OBS settings were wrong, my DaVinci settings were wrong, and by the time YouTube compression got done with it, it looked like total garbo. So I'm going to re-record it and try to remember to touch on everything here. But what we're talking about is the flight model. And what we're not talking about is whether it's good or bad or whether I like it or not, but rather, what is a flight model and what does it take to make one, and what happens to it when you change things. And this is meant to be like a learning experience that I embark on, and that you're welcome to join me on, to learn what it is to actually make something that flies in the 3D space with 6 degrees of freedom, rotating on all these axes and all that fun stuff. And then dive into all the hypotheses on Spectrum about the flight model in Star Citizen and plug in values that represent those hypotheses and see what it actually does to the game, right? Because we can draw all the 2D diagrams of the geometry we want, and we can make all the 18 paragraph mega threads on Spectrum we want. But I think it would be fun and educational for us to, just get into the computer and try it. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, I am by no means a developer. I'm in cybersecurity by trade. I deal with AWS and Azure and GCP, and I write scripts for Terraform and Puppet and Chef and Ansible. I deal with public key infrastructure. I deal with Active Directory. I deal with Linux. I deal with networking hardware. I don't write software, but I'm familiar with the tools. So I felt that I know enough to be dangerous, and so let's go embark on this adventure and learn what it actually takes to make something fly through space. So what you're watching me do now is fly my invisible spaceship here through a representation of an asteroid field, which is going to continuously spawn asteroids in front of us forever, no matter what direction we go in. So we always have some obstacles to try to avoid. And I haven't figured out yet how to get the joysticks to work, and I haven't figured out how to get the mouse to work as a virtual joystick. So I'm doing this 2 hands on the keyboard, WASD, QE, space, control, and the arrow keys to handle all 6 degrees of freedom. So I realized really quickly that I also need an IFCS, which, if I turn it on, will use counter forces on my invisible cube that is my ship to stabilize it automatically for me, to make it quite a bit easier to fly. And right now we're chugging along at 215 meters a second. We can hit the boost here and get up to the pre-master mode's speed of 21, 2 kilometers a second and change. And then we can really cook through this asteroid field. And we know we can do this because we did it for years around Yella, before master modes existed, right? So we know we can operate at this speed, especially coupled, right? Now, the ones that spawn directly in front of my face, well, I'm not really going to count those, but we can we can navigate these, right? We know we can do it. We did it for ages. But the power of doing this experiment this way is, well, okay, now we've seen that, and it does look a little bit twitchy to my eye, and a new player might certainly have a hard time doing that. So what does happen when we go in and say, okay, in master modes, we're actually going to limit the maximum boost speed to 1125 meters a second, right? So if I go find my fighter ship here and look at all of the values that govern, his mass and his maximum base impulse and his maximum boost impulse and his deceleration rate and his pitch yaw and roll maximum outputs in radians per second, and his strafe multipliers and his drag coefficients and his boost multipliers, and go down here and look at the clamps that lock the maximum velocity of the ship before we stop pushing the curve for boost, and try it again. Let's get out of this little cluster that we started here. Now, if we boost, even with the IFCS off, I'm definitely having an easier time keeping this thing under control and navigating through here. It doesn't feel terribly slow, right? It's still kind of fun. It's still pretty quick, pretty twitchy, requires some reaction time to dodge these things, especially using all keyboard inputs. So it's still pretty good. So, what's contributing to that sense of speed is not as much the fact that I'm literally going half the speed I was before, but it still feels okay. It's, how fast I'm going past all of the reference points, right? When I am flying through this dust field, it's giving you a great... Let me turn my IFCS back on because I just got way out of control there. It's giving you a great sense of directionality and velocity because the dust is zipping by all the time. Same thing with the asteroid fields. So this doesn't actually feel that slow, even though we're going half the speed we were going, which is a good sign, and probably part of the reason why a lot of people don't actually mind master modes. Again, I'm not going to comment on whether I like it or not one way or the other. That's not what this is about. It's just, relevant that the controversy exists and is the reason why I'm trying to undertake this learning journey here. But, it's still pretty good. And the reason that we want to play with this now is, what are all the hypotheses on the spectrum, right? They're about we changed the PYR values. So you might notice when I press the left arrow key, I don't just immediately apply a maximum amount of thrust in that direction. I follow a ramp curve that's defined in my code there. And when I want to go the other direction, I have to first overcome the inertia that I've already got based on the mass of the ship and the power output of the thrusters. Although I have stabilization on, so that's also helping. I turn that off, it becomes a little bit more evident, because if I let go with the IFCS off, we'll just keep spinning until I apply a countering thrust, and then we have to overcome that inertia and then ramp up our speed in the other direction. All that math and that sliding scale of applying that thrust, that was the stuff that I needed ChatGPT's help with, but we've got it working on every axis, right? So now if I pitch up and let go, we'll just keep floating around space in a circle until I apply an opposing force, and then I have to overcome that inertia, go the other direction, just like the ships do in Star Citizen. So now we have a very rudimentary test apparatus to go and try all those things, try all those suggestions people have, what if the rotation speed was faster, or what if the ramp time for getting to maximum pitch or roll was slower or faster or what have you? What would that do to the flight model? What would that do to the feeling? We can try it all out as we go and build this thing up. And then my ultimate goal is, once I get it to be able to use joysticks and mouse VJoy and all that stuff, is not to release a game, because one, I can't do art. Two, I already have a day job. It would probably frown on me selling a piece of software. Three, I have no interest in competing with Chris Roberts. But I would like to make this available to everyone on GitHub and have it be able to pull in ship classes from a config file, so that you can take your own ideas of changing these values, plug it in, load up into an infinite asteroid field, and zip around and see what your ideas about the flight model actually feel like. I think that might be a really fun idea, and so I'm going to release a video every week documenting this journey as I learn to do more and better stuff with this, and make it more and more usable, and introduce collision with the asteroids, right? So you don't just fly right through them and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to take a look really quickly at what it takes to do this, because the very rudimentary thing that you just saw, there's 1,000 lines of code just to govern the moving of the ship. There's a couple hundred lines to handle input. There's a couple hundred lines to handle the asteroids. There's a handful of lines to handle the space dust. A handful, or a couple hundred actually, to handle the concept of a voxel grid, right, which is where the cube exists, right? The cube is a voxel, and the thrusters are on each face of it are voxels. All in, it's like 2,000 lines of code, and it's a tenth as complex as a Star Citizen ship, or a hundredth even as complex as a Star Citizen ship, right? Here we're, for as far as the game engine's concerned, a cube of a specific mass was uniformly distributed throughout the cube, meaning our center of mass and our center of inertia, or our moment of inertia rather, and it is all the middle of the cube, and our little thrusters that can fire magically in every direction, you only need one of them really to rotate on any axis, but a Star Citizen ship is large and strangely shaped, and is different mass on different parts of the ship, and the moment of inertia and the center of mass not necessarily in the same place, and the vector that the main engine produces thrust is not necessarily in line with that center of mass, and so thrusters have to compensate, and certain thrusters on different positions of the ship, based on the leverage that they have around the moment of inertia, will have to produce more or less thrust in concert with each other to get you that smooth rotation around an axis, right? So if it's this much to deal with one ship that's a cube, you just have to imagine how complicated and how insanely complex the Star Citizen code must be to deal with that for 150 ships of all different shapes and sizes and weights, right? With different types of thrusters and power plants and engines and components that all have their own mass and volume, distributed around different parts of the ship, and then you redo the interior so that you can fit a bunch of components in there, but now I made a bunch of mass over here that the thrusters weren't programmed to deal with, so now I gotta retune all my thrusters or whatever so the ship still moves smoothly and properly. You can really start to see how it goes way down the rabbit hole real quick, in order to get to a place where the ships move consistently according to a language expressed by a model, right? And so, in that regard, I think, we should give CIG a little bit of credit. No matter what our individual opinions of the flight model might be. But what we're going to do on this journey, if you will come along with me, is learn everything it takes to make our own little thing that flies and operates on, all the axes required to do SIGSTOF, and play with it and mess with it and tune different hypotheses out and bear them out and see what they actually be like. So if you want to follow that along, go ahead and subscribe, or don't. I'm not your dad. But whatever you do, enjoy your day and fly safe.